Firstly, what more do we know about these two military entities and how much control do they have in the region?
Thanks for having me, Danica, and thanks for always mentioning my Navy Reserve affiliation. As a reminder, as I'm not on duty, these views are my own. You asked the exact correct question. What kind of influence do these militaries have? We in Australia and the U.S., we think about the term military as sort of a branch of the executive power of the government, something the government can call on for power. But if you think to the Tatmadaw, the military of Myanmar, it actually is a political party with weapons. I mean, it has a certain number of percentage of the actual parliament, right? And it does try to build influence in a political sense around the actual standing government, which is why we're in the position we're in today. So think about it that way when we're actually framing the discussion. It's a political party with weapons, right? What we've seen over the last several weeks is escalations of the Tatmadaw's willingness to use force to tamp down on the protests against it and against this coup. And you've seen open firing on groups on a funeral, women and children being killed. I mean, that is just not in the definition of a military that would even be trying to support a valid government, right? This is why you're seeing over the past week international calls to name Tatmadaw as a terrorist group. So a national military being called a terrorist group for that, which is not unprecedented, but in this case, that would be an escalation. And the question is, will we see condemnation from different foreign leaders and sanctions, which is already, as we mentioned, is already in the works, or will there be further action?
Well, the US and the UK have now imposed these sanctions, as we mentioned. Will the increased pressure be enough to force change?
Well, history says that it isn't, that you'll need to have a support for some of the groups inside the country to actually rise up against the coup. But even in the last 24 hours, we've seen another statement from multiple militaries, including the US and Australia, saying this is not what a military does. This, even if the Tatmadaw was saying that they're trying to protect the democracy of the country, you wouldn't open fire on civilians at a funeral in order to make that statement. So it's already defying that internal logic that it has. And the question will be, is that enough to ramp up pressure? Unfortunately, the UN Security Council, both China and Russia have vetoes on them. And both China and on the Security Council, both China and Russia actually sent representatives to the Armed Forces Day parade that the coup leaders held on Saturday. So you kind of show, they're already showing where what side they're on.
Where their allegiances lie. Jason, on another matter, North Korea has fired 2 suspected ballistic missiles into the ocean near Japan. It's believed to be a test launch. It's the first time we've seen this in a year. Why now?
Danica, I don't want to be glib about missile launches, but it's that time of year, right? For North Korea, we've talked about the cycle of them realizing that it's been a year since they've been in the front page paper of the paper in the global news, and it's time for them to do a test launch. They also saw that Japan and South Korea recently held high-level meetings with the U.S., and one of these launches went into the sea between North Korea and Japan. So it's provocative in that sense. But North Korea, we've seen, it's a continued cycle of using a test like this to build outrage, build some press, and then trying to use that as leverage for its negotiations. The U.S. has said they're still in the final reviews of their North Korea strategy planning, so we should see things in the coming weeks, but right now it's business as usual.
Okay, so it's to deliberately try and provoke the US. What will it mean then in terms of the dialogue that Joe Biden uses with Kim Jong-un? We, of course, saw that summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. Will it provoke him or force him to do the exact same?
Yeah, so if I was going to summarize how the Trump and Un meetings ended, it was on a miscommunication about the meaning of denuclearization, because you finished with them both sides saying, okay, we're going to agree to denuclearize, but they didn't define that word, right? For the US, it means an irreversible removal of nuclear capability off of the peninsula, whereas in North Korea, it might just mean we stop testing, right? So what President Biden said is, I am willing to negotiate in some form, but I don't think you'll be seeing a presidential summit. You'll probably return to moving back to the lower levels. And if they have an agreement on something substantive, maybe you could have the presidents meet to sign it. But I don't think you'll just have these meetings for show anymore.
All right, it'll be interesting to see that relationship between the two. Just finally, Jason, Taiwan has reported the largest ever incursion by the Chinese Air Force into its airspace. What does that mean moving forward? How serious a threat is this now?
Right, this is called the Air Identification Zone. And by Taiwan law and international law standards, aircraft are not supposed to enter that area without receiving prior permission and identification.